And this is what drives me crazy. Because when I go back to my own community and I see some of these kids suffering, and I see some of our own people suffering, and then I hear some windbag politician talk about another program that's not even going to help, that gets me angry.
Now you've become a famous or infamous. Potentially voice in the BC political space, and I mean the Canadian political space, really. And I'm curious to know, is that always how you saw the world and how you saw politics, or has this kind of been have you grown into the views that you hold now?
Well, the views changed, just like everybody else, but I was never one to be quiet if I saw something wrong, and I was never wrong. I was never one to be just to go with the crowd, just for the sake of it. It was always, my dad always taught me, always try to be a good man. The other things, when I got into fights in school in town or fights in a village here, as being a skinny kid, a white kid on reserve, my dad would never step in or intervene. He'd just say, stand up for yourself, fight back. And he actually encouraged me to actually stand up for others that were being bullied or fighting. And it was natural. It's just the way we were raised in the 70s.
You think it's becoming harder to speak the truth now than it used to be?
Definitely. There's so many political groups out there, I'm not just talking about the political groups being the Liberals, Conservatives, or the NDP, but there's so many political groups out there that are trying to manipulate messages that are not officially political parties, but they're actually groups that are trying to twist messages and trying to change the way Canadians think about Canadians, or change the way we think about resources for the matter. So it's really hard for the average Canadian to understand or figure out who to believe. I mean, there's a tremendous amount of groups out there right now that are trying to influence, and it's really hard to find the truth nowadays.
And how do you think, because I've dealt, you got the cancel culture and kind of the rewriting of history or perversion of history. How do you fight back against that kind of stuff? It's something that I kind of try to deal with, but how do you push back in the 21st century?
I don't. If it's something that Canadians truly want to do, fine, go for it. Elect somebody that wants to do that for you. But I don't actually jump onto those campaigns either for or against. I've got the same problem. I've had the same problem for years with First Nations history, where the First Nations online on Facebook seem to think that the First Nations culture was more akin to Tibetan monk culture. It's all about love and peace and acceptance, and actually that's not what First Nations culture is all about. And trying to believe, off Facebook, that First Nations were more about, love and respect, as opposed to what we're really like, we're doing our youth a disservice, and we're doing Canadians a disservice. It's not a shameful thing to talk about how our communities before white contact were actually warlike, very warlike. You had to be violent. You had to learn how to fight. And a lot of communities actually used to raid other communities. And when you're raiding, killing happens, injuries happen, and you end up stealing the other resources of other First Nation community. If you try paint over all that with a glossy paintbrush and say that never existed, well, actually, that's not the point of learning your history. And that goes for the cancel culture, tearing down statues. And I agree that, some of the stuff at John A. Macdonald was bad. But why do you want to erase history? Why don't you just add to that history and just say, well, yeah, he might have done some bad things, he might have done some good things, but here's the truth of it all. But don't erase anybody's history, whether it be First Nations or non-First history. That's not doing anybody any favors.
Well, I couldn't agree more. I mean, when you said, let's add to it instead of subtract to it, and add to it with conversations like this, or putting up more statues of other individuals or context around them, I think it does a disservice to society to take away rather than add to it.
Oh yeah.
Now, Coastal GasLink, for everyone and for myself, when did this all and the LNG Canada export facility? When did this all start? Where's the origins of this story? Obviously, you guys are an industrial town here for a while. That predates LNG and natural gas. But when did this all start? Was this when you were on council, before you were on council, chief councillor? When did this all?
Well, in my era, it started in 2004, and it wasn't LNG Canada. It was actually a project called KLNG. There was a group of people that came in and proposed to set up a LNG import facility. In 2004, they were actually proposing to bring in LNG into Canada.
Where were they importing it from?
I'm not even sure. That's actually a good question.
Yeah, interesting.
But for like a couple of years, we actually addressed our rights and title in terms of that, because 2004 was the same year that the Haida court case came out on a duty to consult. But during that time, we were doing a lot of reading, and a lot of our advisors saying, you know, the import story is not the place to be. It's actually export, because now they've figured out how to get more gas out of the provincial asset. So we convinced the actual proponents to say you should switch. And in terms of your environmental certificate, we'll support your amendment if you switch to export, which we did. Now back then, I already told you, I had no clue about what words were. Like I had to look up the word fiduciary. I had some of the reports I read, I didn't understand what LNG was. And one of the first things I had to figure out was there's a distinction between crude oil and LNG.
No
right?
kidding, yeah.
And that still prevails today. People still think pipelines are the big, bad, evil things based on what came out of Prince William Sound or what came out of Kalamazoo, which actually isn't the case. So that's where it started. I wasn't chief counselor then. I was a counselor trying to figure all this stuff. And actually, in the beginning, I actually opposed it. I opposed the location, and I opposed forestry, I opposed mining, I opposed all of this based on the narrative that was told to me when I was a young man. Oh, the non-natives came in and took away everything, and they're persecuting us, you know, they're keeping us down. So I believed that before I got into council. When I got into council, it took me a couple years to realize, actually, no, these guys really want a relationship with us. They want to give us jobs, they want to give us contracts, they want to train us, and then it morphed into something bigger. So that's where the story really started.
And so it was your experience, I guess, on council. At that time, did you have mentors growing up, or did you just kind of, on council? The reason I asked is because chatting with Chief Councillor Crystal Smith earlier, and you were clearly her mentor. First as a basketball coach, and then I guess she was your assistant before she's obviously risen that way. So did you grow up the same way, or were you kind of a bull charting his own path?
You know, but at that time, in 2004, we had a chief counselor that was proposing something dramatic to us in respect of everything that was hitting us. Like we had to fight with Ottawa to actually stop them from shutting us down, for example. But in terms of our future, he really, truly believed that we had to take rights and title to the next level. And we had to actually use that as one of our major tools to get us to a future of independence. Now, none of us understood that. That's the first time I ever heard rights and title in that context. Like I remember when I was a young man in 1982, long before I got on council, the announcement that Section 35 of the Constitution would recognize rights and title. Now, me as a young man, I got no clue what rights and title is. I got no clue what the Constitution is. But here I am celebrating. I'm clapping with everybody else. Yay! Rights and title are recognized. And then for the next 30, 40 years, nothing changed. Nothing happened. Because rights and title had to be defined through the courts for the next 40 years, culminating in the Haida court case. But so I gave up on the Indian Act. I gave up on pleading with government for more money. I didn't believe in begging for money. I gave up on treaty negotiations. So I needed something else. So I started reading all the rights and title case law, Delgamu, Gladstone, Haida. I even read some of the court cases that actually failed in the courts. And so it took me a couple years to realize that I actually agreed with our chief counselor. So he laid down the basics of why we should be pursuing case law. And by the time I became chief, I had 8 years in the trenches as a counselor. So by the time I became chief, I fully understood what I wanted to do and how to do it and who was going to help me get there. So I had the luxury of sitting back and learning, watching everything from the background.
Now when you look around us at this marina that we're standing at, the huge industrial facilities that are existing and are expanding just behind us, all the changes that have happened in the community. you must look back at that as someone who's played an instrumental role and feel such a tremendous amount of pride for your community, for yourself. When did you kind of get on that path where you had that vision? Was it when you went to run as chief counselor? Is that when you kind of had the vision of all of this happening? Has it even exceeded your expectations?
That's actually a pretty good question.
Was this in Ellis Ross's mind 10, 15 years ago? Was this?
So, well, when I decided to run for chief counselor, I felt that I had learned enough. I knew everything about, as much as I could, about the Indigenous Rights and Title Treaty, and I knew how to, in my mind, how to leverage rights and title. So by the time I became chief, I knew, number one, everybody knows how impatient I am. Everybody knows that I don't suffer fools. I don't like wasting time. And so by the time I became chief, I let everybody know exactly how aggressive I was going to be in terms of making sure we got a brand new dock, for example, how we were going to acquire MKB, how we were going to acquire the hospital lands in the middle of District Kitimat, how we were going to acquire the lands on that side of the channel, how we were going to acquire those lands just below my village, and on and on and on. I just knew that everything seemed right to me. All the answers seemed to be there. The problems are there, of course, but I just felt, without a doubt, no doubt, I have the answer, and I'm going to pursue it. And anybody that gets in my way, good luck, because I've been listening to the problems of First Nations for too long, and I was fed up with actually everybody talking about First Nations problems in terms of alcohol abuse, our members going to prison, our children going into care, and everybody just talking about it, but nobody offering solutions. So I thought, I'm gonna basically set down a framework of how we actually address our own issues on our own terms, and that's. I know it came out very. At times I was characterized as a dictator. Even some of my own council members said that to me, but I did my homework, and I actually paid a lot of my dues, and I'm just glad it worked out the way it did, because now we're not looking back. Yeah. We are a completely different community from 10 years ago. Yeah. Completely different.
And has the jobs and economic development, those opportunities, does that help alleviate a bunch of those other problems that you mentioned about? There's a correlation there?
Big time. And you know, if you read some of the reports that came out of the Aboriginal organizations across Canada, they'll talk about the Aboriginal issues. And there's always a section that talks about how much a job can help to alleviate these issues. Now, this is one of the aspects of the Aboriginal issue in Canada that I learned on a job. I saw it in action. And so my idea was, okay, if we can get this generation and the next generation to actually look at the value of what it means to have a job, maybe when they get that job, maybe they can look at other values themselves. I mean, in terms of valuing the family structure, because I saw this on a job. In terms of valuing, say, an RRSP for their future, in terms of valuing owning their own house. And this is all stuff I learned on a job. So when you actually translate that to social issues, we keep putting Band-Aids on Aboriginal issues. We keep putting Band-Aids on it. Whereas I saw when this young guy got a job, he was making a lot of money, he's saving a lot of money, and then he said, well, I want to buy a truck. I want to go on holiday. Well, that's a value. And then when I saw them actually getting families of their own, they want a family now, I want a house. I want to look after my kids. I don't want my kids to grow up the way I did. I just thought the seed for that was going to be, okay, we got to show these people there's a way to a better future, but it's actually on your shoulders to actually go after that future. I'll open the door for you, I'll create the opportunity, but it's really up to you. And the success is actually amazing, is what we're seeing right now.
It is, and I wonder why we don't hear that message more often in the media. It's always, you pointed out the kind of the Band-Aid solutions. Yeah. It seems like those are the ones that are always being proposed by the panels or the different groups that come out with reports. Whereas here we're standing in on Heist territory outside of Kitimat, where it's literally a living example, is it not, of how you turn something like this around? But yet we don't hear it.
No, and the cynic in me, the angry BC-born, Canadian-born citizen in me, and I've said this before, but it was never publicized because it's actually too controversial to say it, because this is a living for these leaders, to live off the misery of natives in Canada. It's a living. Indian issues in Canada are a multi-billion-dollar industry. Provides jobs for leaders of all stripes, for lawyers, for the courts, for the social workers. It's a huge industry. The Indian Act alone is billions and billions of dollars. So why would anybody want to fix it? And this is what drives me crazy. Because when I go back to my own community and I see some of these kids suffering, and I see some of our own people suffering, and then I hear some windbag politician talk about another program that's not even going to help, that gets me angry. When I actually see one of my band members trying to get out of prison or trying to stay out of prison, and then you hear a politician make a speech about that with a Band-Aid speech, that gets me angry. Now there's a lot of stuff we can't fix right now that's been actually in development for the last 10, 20, 30 years, but we actually can fix it right now so the next generation doesn't have to grow up the way we did, the way I did. And this is what angers me about why we don't see more often leaders talking about the value of a job and how if you can accomplish that value can add to other values being brought into it.
And how I'm really curious to know how going from chief counselor to MLA, what that transition was like. A little bit of a different,
very different.
A little bit of different tool belt you got on as far as what you can do and can't do.
It almost comes full circle in terms of the politicalness, because as a counselor and as chief counsel, I had to follow the mandate at the table. I had to be, one of the cogs in the machine. But as chief counselor, I had full control of what I could do, say, when I could travel, when I can't travel. Then I become an MLA in opposition, mind you, for the BC Liberals, and I find myself, I'm just right back in those days of being a counselor. I am truly humbled and grateful that I got this experience, especially as a young Indian kid coming off the reserve at, high school diploma is probably not even worth the paper it's written on. I'm incredibly blessed.
And I mean, you mentioned incredibly blessed, but obviously didn't just land in your lap. It was something that you've really worked for and gone through the jump through the hoops to get to and everything. And another question I had is how does it feel being an obvious? We had probably 5 or 6 conversations at the band office, and you are, I would say, a legitimate kind of icon, possibly hero to a lot of these people. I have 4 or 5 conversations, and I mentioned earlier that of all the messages I get on through social media, you're the #1 person that people want to hear from and want me to talk to, and that is quite the ascent over the last couple of 2 decades. And I mean, just reflecting back on that, you've transformed a community, you've transformed a broader territory, you've transformed a province in a lot of ways, and you're really a hero to a lot of people, and I'm sure especially young Haisla band members and First Nations across the country. And how is that just simply, it seems to me, I don't want to put words into my mouth, but your story seems to be one of kind of always speaking the truth and kind of trying to do what's right, and everything else kind of came after or fell from that. Is that a...
Yeah, that's valid. I mean, I don't think, I'm not a career politician. I'm pretty rough around the edges. But earlier on, it was actually advised to me when I was a young man, it's just, I was actually just starting to become a basketball star. People were starting to recognize me. I was only
basketball star. I haven't heard this story.
Yeah. No, you didn't know that?
No, I heard. I knew player. I knew coach. I didn't know star. So
yeah, I was. I'm in the all-native. I'm in the all-native Hall of Fame in Prince Rupert.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Was that? Were you driving to the hoop or shooting threes or what?
Post, drive to the hoop, shooting. Yeah, more of a scorer than anything else. And then became a defender in my later years because you can't live on offense your entire life.
Yeah.
But when I was younger, one of the people that really shaped my thinking was my older sister, who's not with us anymore. But I was walking, what it's like to be a young guy. You're full of swagger, and I'm good because everybody says I'm good. And I was actually really enjoying what people were saying about me. And my sister told me one night, He said, never believe the bad things that people say about you. And on the other hand, never believe the good things that people say about you. So I've seen this in print. I've gotten messages all the time, and I take it with a grain of salt. I don't really dwell on it because I think in this position, too much praise can go to your head and ruin you. And if you take the criticism to heart, too much criticism can go to your head and ruin you. So I'd much rather just basically say, look, I'm doing a job. I'm doing it on behalf of the people that want me to do the job. And I leave it at that. You know what's surprising to me was, as an Aboriginal, I knew what I wanted to do. I knew that I was going to benefit the community, benefit my members, and somehow maybe we could duplicate it for other First Nation communities when they saw our success. What surprised me was all the non-First Nations people that came up to me and actually asked me to do the same thing and thank me for what I was doing and keep it up. And so it's actually, I think the message of trying to build people and build the region, it doesn't matter what your race is or what your background is. Everybody wants to have a job, raise a family, buy a house, go on vacation. It doesn't matter if you're Native or not. And so I think that's what actually resonates with people across the region in BC, and if not Canada.
And how does it feel to you, again, looking around of everything that's been built here in Kitimat, the transformation that's happened to the Heist Nation, you becoming elected as an MLA, and then basically being blockaded from entering a legislature where you're a sitting member for supposedly not standing up for First Nation and Indigenous rights. How did that make you feel?
That kid that actually blocked me from going into the legislature and yelled at me that I should stand up for Native rights. Number one, he didn't know what he's talking about. And that's the problem I see with non-First Nations, First Nations alike. A lot of ignorance in terms of really what's at stake. And if some of these people could come just take a look at some of these young kids in our community that are not complaining about the Indian Act, that are not complaining about being on welfare, that are not complaining about being unemployed. In fact, some of these young kids now are getting mortgages in their own right, not under the Indian Act. They're going on vacation. And at the same time, I'm not a fan of what's happening right now. Let's put it this way. This whole campaign that's built on white guilt. And somehow, if we guilt the white people into this, our problems will be solved. No, it won't be. Here in Kitimat, we solved our issue of being dependent on government funding. And now the next generation has a good start. And with that, solving that Native issue, we actually made the region even stronger. None of that improvement to our people's lives came out of the taxpayer's pocket. None of it. There's a way to fix what's going on here. But we can't do it on blaming people or blaming races. I mean, if there's an opportunity that's provided to our First Nations community, there's your one opportunity to actually help fix your own problems on your own terms. So how does this all make me feel? Incredibly proud that I played my part. And at some point, my hope is that my kids are actually dealing with a whole set of different issues that I ever had to deal with. And I really hope that they never mention, when they get to the leadership position, they never have to mention the Indian Act. They never have to mention white guilt. They never have to mention welfare. Maybe they got a whole list of different issues. And it's just, that's my hope. We got to evolve, because at the end of the day, I don't want to just, as a First Nations community or people, I don't want to just survive. I want our people to thrive. I want them to be able to participate in the economy and society as healthy as possible. That was always my goal.
And why do you think, given the success that you've had here and that message that you just repeated, why do you think that some of these counter movements or the protests, so the blockades in February and March, I mean, I can only imagine you just spent the better part of a decade, 2 decades, working to bring a project to light, working to bring it to the finish line, the Coastal GasLink pipeline, the export terminal facility here, and then being primarily a local issue for you personally, to see it blow up into this national thing. In Ontario, you had rail blockades, in Quebec, all throughout, all the way here to British Columbia, and the entire lens and all of the media on focusing on something that you've been working on for for more than a decade
Yeah.
and being distorted in all sorts of different ways. Why do you think that keeps happening?
Because basically the narrative works. And for those that don't really take a deep dive into what really happened ever since 2004, you had a knee-jerk reaction. You really truly believed that Coastal GasLink or the provincial government or the federal government were coming down and basically keeping natives down and oppressing natives. We're not being oppressed. We never were. In fact, in terms of the LNG opportunity, it was actually my band that brought the LNG opportunity to the BC legislature. It wasn't the other way around. I had to bring to my community, I had to bring Mary Polak, who was the first BC minister to Kitimat. And I took her on a tour down channel and I showed her why LNG should be located in a certain location as opposed to another location. We brought Christy Clark here, gave her a helicopter tour. This is why you guys got to come after LNG. This is why you guys got to do it. We talked to guys like Rich Coleman, John Rustad, all ministers of the BC government at the time, and we tried to convince them, you've got to pursue LNG, you got to support it. So people saying that, believing that LNG was being forced down our throats, the BC government did a good job in consulting afterwards, after we actually asked them to actually get involved. The company, I mean, I was part of those meetings from here to Prince George. I was part of those meetings. I was actually invited to Morristown on 3 occasions, 2 for public meetings and 3 other occasions to go talk to the chief and council to talk about the pros and cons of LNG. I was part of the PTPFN. I was part of the First Nations Limited Partnership. So it wasn't just my community I was advocating. I was going out all over the place and I was talking to what was really going on for these other communities that weren't truly aware of what the details were. I was actually going to conferences. I mean, I traveled all over BC. I went to the Yukon for the ministers' meeting. I traveled to Alberta. You know the strangest thing? I got invited to Long Beach, California, for a conference.
An LNG conference?
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess they have some down the coast, right, or Oregon or something like that.
No idea, not a clue. But that was one of the first times I realized, the interest in LNG, not only from Canadians but United States perspective. The other thing I realized, when they tell you that you're going to go up on stage for 45 minutes, go use the bathroom first because it's going to last an hour and a half. But it was, I traveled all over BC and I went to the States a couple times and Yukon. I went all over the place to kind of spread the truth about LNG and First Nations issues.
And what would you say is the one message or multiple messages that you would send to people, especially in Victoria or the Lower Mainland, who view building this Coastal GasLink pipeline, the export terminal facility, as somehow incompatible with Indigenous rights?
You've got your thinking wrong. And the way LNG got approved today and 5 years ago and 6 years ago is actually based on rights. Everything that you do with the First Nation community now in terms of projects is based on rights. So that story's already gone. But if you're still actually opposing this, thinking that somehow it's detrimental to First Nations, you're actually wrong. Because what's detrimental to First Nations right now is the amount of our people going to prison, the amount of our kids going to government care, the amount of our people living on welfare, the amount of social issues and ills that actually hasn't been addressed dramatically in the last 30, 40 years. So if you're actually opposing the projects here that First Nations actually supported for the last 10 years, you're actually saying to First Nations, we're okay with you going to prison. We're okay with your kids going to care. We're okay with all your alcohol issues and your, one of the sickest things I ever heard at a public meeting, because I was telling people, this creates a better future for us because our kids will have jobs. One of the sickest, most disgusting things I ever heard was a person getting up that we could create jobs by actually opening up more alcohol treatment centers. Are you kidding me? So you're going to create an industry off the suffering of Aboriginals instead of fixing the root of the problem when it's been proven that jobs can actually help any person, whether you're Aboriginal or not, actually build a better life? I mean, this is actually just some of the twisted thinking that's out there. And if people in Vancouver or the Lower Mainland or Vancouver Island, if you could really see what Aboriginal elected leaders were trying to achieve in terms of the social issue I just described, you would no doubt change your mind, especially if you saw a young person 22 years old, that has not experienced alcohol abuse, that is not on their way to prison, that is not sending their child into government care, you change your mind, because the statistics don't lie.
To follow up on that point, do you think that some groups or individuals are using First Nations disingenuously to kind of pursue a different agenda?
Oh, without a doubt. And it was actually, that was created when Aboriginals were still trying to become part of the equation. And in 2004, when the Haida Court case came out, it became clear you have to include First Nations at the table. The First Nations that I came across from here to Prince George were never opposed to natural resource projects. Never opposed. They wanted to be included. And they had issues they wanted to resolve. They wanted to resolve unemployment. They wanted some kind of revenue stream other than Ottawa. And so what happened, unfortunately, though, was exterior groups came in and saw that opposition and used it for their own benefit. It doesn't happen as much anymore, but it does happen, because what happens now is these groups, knowing that their leadership of communities actually can't be used anymore to stop projects. So what they do is they come into their communities and actually take factions inside the communities and actually use that to actually oppose projects, and trying to paint the image that First Nations oppose resource projects, when in fact we don't. We don't. It's now that we're at the table and we have the answers for unemployment, it's actually the opposite.
In a lot of cases, you guys are resource communities.
We are.
And probably more disproportionately so
Yeah.
than other communities in Canada,
We are.
for sure.
It was actually our hereditary chiefs in the public meetings back in 2004. One of the things they said was, we're tired of seeing logs leaving our territory and we get nothing. They never said we want to stop logging.
Yeah.
In fact, the only time I ever heard them want to stop logging was our watershed here. They didn't want to touch, they wanted logged. So our council made an agreement that said, okay, we'll get the opportunity to log anywhere in our territory, but part of that package will be our watershed that we will voluntarily not log. But I've never heard anybody be anti-resource. I mean, not the way I was.
Yeah.
When I first started, I was anti-resource, but I didn't have facts. I didn't have knowledge.
One final question for you. What's next for the Heist Nation, your community here that you represent, and most interestingly, maybe Ellis Ross?
Well, that's probably easier to talk about what's next for the Heisla than it is for myself. For the Heisla, sky's the limit. Getting away from those old narratives that were actually false opened up the door to a whole list of possibilities now, because we're not scared of private land. We're not scared of taxes. We're not scared of businesses. We're not scared of anything. And so I think the Heisla now have at a real crossroads in determining how successful do we want to be? How big do we want to be? I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but when I became chief counsel, one of the first things I did was I took us out of treaty negotiations. We're not negotiating a treaty with BC and Canada. Because I thought, if all we're after is inclusion, jobs, contracts, training, and we're achieving that already, 10 times over, as opposed to any other First Nation in treaty negotiations, why do we need treaty? And so I was treaty chairman for 8 years, by the way. But I could see it. If you look at it in terms of where we were, in terms of what the possibilities are, you can see it. It's just a matter of what do we want to do next. And by the way, if we propose something like what do we want to do next, and not having to go beg government for money, oh my God, that is such a proud moment. Hey, let's build a fire hall. Yeah, okay, should we apply for money from government? No, let's build it ourselves using our own money. Done. Hey, let's help renovate our dock. Okay, do we want to apply for money? No, let's do it in our own money. And it's just so satisfying. We don't owe anybody anything. We don't expect anything from anybody. We're on our own, we're independent. And I think that attitude is translating to our members. It's just a brand new day for us, so sky's the limit for us.
And for yourself?
I thought you forgot that question.
I'm circling back to it.
Well, I don't know. Ever since I put my name up for provincial elections, I've always been encouraged to run federally. But I don't think I'm the right person for federal politics. I'm more of a on the ground kind of guy. And knowing what I know now in the last 2 years of learning, there's a place for me someplace. I don't know what it is, but more people are coming up to me asking me to take on different roles to actually help with different issues. So for the time being, I'm gonna stick out this term as an MLA. It's not my dream job, by the way. I never wanted to do this, but it's fascinating. And what I think about more often now than I didn't think about back then is, where can I be in a story of building a bigger, better BC? Where can I be? Where can I do the most good? That's a question nobody's really been able to answer, including myself. But there's something out there, I just don't know what it is. So I'm going to keep my options open.
I really appreciate everything that you've done. I know lots of people that agree with me that they're really looking forward to probably hearing this and hearing what you have to say. So thanks for taking the time. Up in Kitimat, kind of where ground zero from where this all kind of, your career and life kind of took a turn and went down that fork. And it's pretty incredible. So thanks for taking the time to talk with me.
You're very welcome.
Awesome.